The first encounter in the vast alien world of Xylor, darkness seemed to stretch forever, and the air was thick with tension. The planet, known for its dangerous creatures and unpredictable landscapes, was not a place for the weak. But Zek, the smallest creature in the room, moved cautiously through the thick mist. His heart pounded in his chest and his eyes scanned the surroundings, ever watchful. He was alone, and in this world alone meant vulnerable. Zek wasn't like the others. He was different. Standing at just over 2 feet tall, his body was built for survival, not for strength. His skin was pale and almost transparent, a feature that made him blend into his surroundings. He had no sharp claws or massive jaws like the other creatures, but Zek had something they didn't: intelligence and agility, the tools he relied on to survive. He had been traveling for days, his mission unclear, but the weight of it heavy on his shoulders. All he knew was that he had to keep moving, keep surviving, and keep his species' legacy alive. He couldn't afford to fail. But no matter how many dangers he faced, there was always one question that lingered in the back of his mind. Why was he still here? His species had been wiped out, and now he was the last of them. His survival was more than a fight against the elements. It was a fight against the very memory of his people. As Zek navigated through the jungle-like terrain, he felt a strange sensation, a presence. He froze, his senses sharpening. Something was near. He instinctively crouched low, trying to blend in with the environment. And then, out of the shadows, emerged a giant. The ground shook as the massive creature approached, its massive feet crushing the earth beneath it with each step. Zek could only stare in awe and terror. The creature was a predator, an apex predator. Its body was built for destruction, with enormous muscles rippling under its dark scales. It had claws that could tear through steel and eyes that gleamed. With the cold, calculating nature of a hunter, Zek's small form seemed almost insignificant in comparison. And yet, when the creature finally spoke, it wasn't with the cold voice of a killer. Instead, it spoke softly, almost gently. "Little brother," it said. Zek's heart skipped a beat. He had heard of apex predators before, but never had he encountered one so calm. And why was it calling him little brother? Was it mocking him? Did it know who he was, what he was? The apex predator, whose name was Vark, took a step closer. His towering figure blocked out the sky above, casting a long shadow over Zek. But there was something in Vark's eyes, a glint of curiosity, perhaps even respect. It was unusual for a creature like Vark to show interest in something as small as Zek. "You're not like the others," Vark said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. "You've survived longer than any creature I've ever seen. You have potential. I can feel it." Zek, though shaken, managed to gather his thoughts. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Vark tilted his head, his gaze softening. "I don't want anything from you," he said. "I'm offering you something, an opportunity. Come with me. I can show you a path no one else has seen." Zek stood still for a moment, unsure of what to do. The fear in his chest was real, but there was something else too, an undeniable pull towards this massive predator. It didn't make sense. Why would an apex predator help him? Why would he call him little brother? But Zek couldn't deny it. There was something about Vark, something that made Zek feel like he wasn't so alone after all. And so, despite all the doubts in his mind, he nodded slowly, stepping forward into the unknown. Zek's past. The jungle whispered around Zek as he walked silently beside Vark. The towering predator's steps made the ground tremble beneath them. But Zek was careful, to stay out of the way, walking with a quiet grace. They traveled deeper into the forest, the shadows growing longer as the sun began to set. Zek's mind, however, was far from the path ahead. It was trapped in the past, in memories that had shaped him into the creature he was now. As they moved, through the dense foliage, Zek couldn't help but remember the day everything changed. It had been years ago, back on his home planet when his species had been at the height of their civilization. They were a proud people, small in stature, but brilliant in intellect. Zek had once been one of them, part of a thriving society that valued knowledge, peace, and balance with nature. But all of that was destroyed. Zek had been only a child when the experiment began. The scientists, in their infinite greed and arrogance, had decided that they could create the perfect weapon, a creature that combined intelligence with raw power, something that could conquer any enemy. They had taken Zek's people, tested on them, altered them, experimented on their genetics. Zek had been one of the first subjects in a series of trials meant to improve his kind. The results had been disastrous. His people had been turned into mindless warriors, stripped of their purpose and history. Zek, however, was different. He had been too small to be altered completely, too frail to become a weapon. But that didn't mean he was immune to the changes. His body had been modified, yes, but the experiment had failed to erase his core nature. He was small, but he had a sharp mind and a fierce will to survive. He had watched his people turn into shadows of what they once were, their minds clouded and twisted. Zek was left alone in a broken world, the last surviving member of his species. The pain of seeing his friends and family transformed, of losing everything, weighed heavily on him. But he had kept moving. Survival was all that mattered now. And didn't know what else to do. Your mind is distant. Vark's voice broke through Zek's thoughts, deep and soothing. I can feel the weight on you. You carry a burden, don't you? Zek's eyes flickered towards the giant predator. But he didn't speak at first. How could he explain? How could he put into words the sorrow of watching an entire species fall into ruin? The anger of being part of something so cruel, and the guilt of being the last one left. There's nothing to say, Zek finally muttered, his voice quiet. I wasn't strong enough to save them. Vark stopped walking, his massive form towering over Zek, blocking out the light. For a moment there was only silence, the sound of the wind through the trees the only noise between them. You think your size makes you weak? Vark asked, his voice laced with an odd tenderness. The smallest creature can carry the greatest. Wait, you're still here. That means something. Zek's eyes narrowed. You don't understand. You don't know what it's like to lose everything. To be alone. Vark's gaze softened, and for the first time, Zek saw something in the apex predator's eyes that he hadn't expected, empathy. I know more than you think, Vark said, his voice heavy. I was once like you, lost. But I found my way, and now I'm offering you the same thing. You have a chance to rise above your past. You can make your species proud. Zek hesitated, the weight of Vark's words sinking in. He had always thought he was the last one who mattered. But now there was something in Vark's tone that made him think maybe, just maybe, there was more to his existence than surviving. Maybe he wasn't just the last of his kind. Maybe he could be something greater. I don't know if I'm ready for that, Zek said, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to be ready, Vark replied. You just have to begin. And in that moment something changed inside Zek. It wasn't a sudden realization, nor was it a dramatic shift, but a spark ignited in him, a quiet hope. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. As they continued their journey, through the jungle, Zek's thoughts were no longer on the past. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he had a purpose again. The apex predator's story. The journey through. The dense jungle seemed endless, and Zek's mind raced with the strange turn his life had just taken, walking beside the enormous Vark, the apex predator who had called him little brother. Zek couldn't shake the feeling that everything he had known was about to change forever. It was unsettling, to say the least. For so long, Zek had been nothing but a lone survivor, a creature who had learned to trust no one. But now this towering beast was offering him something that Zek didn't fully understand. As they trekked further into the wilderness, Zek's curiosity began to grow. What was it about Vark that made him so different from the other? predators Zek had encountered in his life, Vark wasn't like the others who ruled through fear and dominance. There was a sense of purpose behind his actions, a wisdom in the way he moved, and Zek couldn't help but wonder, why had Vark chosen him? What did he see in the small, fragile creature that stood beside him? Unable to hold back his questions any longer, Zek finally spoke up, his voice tinged with skepticism. Vark, why are you helping me? You're an apex predator. You don't need someone like me. I'm small, weak. I don't belong in your world. Vark didn't immediately respond, his eyes scanning the surroundings as he walked. The jungle was alive with sounds, but his focus was entirely on Zek. For a moment, the massive predator seemed to consider the question deeply, as if the answer had been a long time coming. When I was young, Vark began, his voice low and deep. I was just like you, weak, small. I was born into a world that demanded strength, power, and dominance, but I didn't have any of those things. He paused for a moment, his golden eyes narrowing as if the memory was still fresh in his mind. I was a runt, the smallest in my pack. The others would mock me, push me aside. I was never good enough. I had to fight just to survive. Zek listened, shocked. He had never imagined that an apex predator like Vark would have such a past, one filled with struggles and weaknesses. The image of the monstrous creature beside him suddenly felt more human, more relatable. Vark continued, his voice quiet but intense. One day, I came across an old, dying warrior, a creature from a different species, older than me. He was in his final moments, but before he died, he gave me something. He told me that true strength didn't come from physical power or size, but from understanding, from learning to use the world around you to your advantage. He said that only by embracing my weaknesses could I become strong. Zek tilted his head, his confusion deepening. So, you didn't become strong by fighting? By being bigger or faster? Vark shook his head. No. I became strong by learning to control my environment, by knowing my limits and using them to my advantage. Strength doesn't always mean muscle. It means the ability to adapt, to learn, and to grow from every challenge. Vark paused, his gaze softening as he turned his attention to Zek. I see the same potential in you. You may be small, but you are clever, and you have something that most creatures, especially apex predators, don't have. Adaptability. Zek felt a strange surge of hope rising in his chest, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Could it be true? Could his small size and quick mind really make him strong? But why me? Zek asked, his voice softer now. Why did you call me little brother? I'm not your kind. I'm nothing like you. Vark stopped walking and turned to face Zek directly, his eyes locking onto Zek's with an intensity that made the smaller creature's heart race. Because, little brother, he said, his voice thick with meaning, strength isn't always about what you can do alone. It's about the bonds you form. You are not like me, but we are alike in ways that matter. You've survived just like I did. You've adapted just like I did. And together we can help each other grow in ways we never thought possible. Zek stood there, stunned by Vark's words. In that moment, something shifted. He had spent so long running from his past, from the memories of his species' downfall, that he hadn't realized he had the potential to rise above it. Maybe he wasn't just a survivor. Maybe he could be something more. And for the first time, Zek allowed himself to believe that he wasn't just the last of his kind. He was something greater, something that could change the fate of everything. The unexpected alliance, the moon rose high in the sky, casting an eerie silver glow over the jungle below. The air felt heavier now, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Zek and Vark walked side by side, their footsteps barely making a sound on the soft, damp earth. The journey ahead felt uncertain, but Zek couldn't help but feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It was a fragile thing, like a delicate thread pulling him forward into the unknown. For the first time, Zek didn't feel so small. Standing next to Vark, the towering apex predator, He felt an odd sense of connection, a sense that maybe he didn't have to fight alone anymore. The bond between them, though strange and unexpected, was real. It was growing, and it was changing everything. Zek had always been a lone survivor. He had learned to trust no one, to rely solely on himself. But now there was Vark, an imposing figure who had offered something Zek had never thought possible: partnership. They weren't the same, and they never would be, but that was exactly what made this alliance so powerful. Together, they were stronger than they could ever be apart. Zek glanced up at Vark, who was walking beside him with a calm confidence, his eyes scanning the landscape as if he were constantly evaluating the world around them. The predator's gaze was sharp, intelligent, calculating. Zek had always relied on his own cleverness to survive, but Vark's approach was different. Vark didn't just react. He observed, learned, and anticipated. It was a method Zek couldn't fully understand, but he was beginning to see the value in it. "So, what exactly are we doing?" Zek finally asked, breaking the silence between them. Vark turned his head slightly as if he had been expecting the question. "We're hunting," he said, his voice smooth and low. "But not the way you're used to. You think survival is about overpowering your enemy, about being stronger than them. But it's not. It's about understanding your surroundings. It's about using your mind, your instincts, and your environment to your advantage." Zek frowned, still unsure of what Vark was getting at. "So you're saying it's not about being the biggest and the toughest?" "Exactly," Vark replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "Your strength isn't in your size. It's in how you adapt, how you think. We're not going to crush anything head-on. Instead, we'll wait. We'll observe. And when the time is right, we'll strike." Zek felt a surge of curiosity. This wasn't the way he had always done things. He had relied on speed and stealth, on being smaller and quicker than his enemies, but this was different. Vark's strategy seemed almost too calm, too calculated. But there was something about it that intrigued him. They moved deeper, into the jungle, and the silence between them grew. The only sounds were the rustling of the leaves, the distant calls of creatures hidden in the shadows, and the steady rhythm of their footsteps. Zek's mind raced, his thoughts whirling with everything he had learned so far. Could he really trust Vark? Could he learn to think like Vark? To use the world around him not just as a place to survive, but as a tool for victory? Then, without warning, Vark stopped. His posture shifted, his body tense, his eyes scanning the darkened jungle ahead. Zek, ever alert, immediately followed Vark's gaze. There, hidden among the thick vines and towering trees, something moved. A creature, large, powerful. And it was getting closer. Vark's voice dropped to a whisper. "This is what I mean. We don't rush, we don't attack blindly, we wait." Zek's heart pounded in his chest. His instincts screamed at him to move, to prepare for the fight, but he held still, watching as Vark's massive figure blended into the shadows. The predator wasn't in a rush. He was waiting for the right moment, the perfect opportunity. And Zek, for the first time in his life, understood what that meant. They waited in silence, the tension building with every passing second. And then, just as the creature stepped into the clearing, Vark moved with lightning speed, using the terrain to his advantage. Zek, though smaller, was quick to follow, darting into the shadows, his movements blending with the night. The creature, confused and disoriented, never saw them coming. Within moments, it was trapped, overwhelmed by the strategic precision of Vark and Zek's combined efforts. There was no wild chase, no reckless fighting. It was clean. It was calculated. As the creature fell, Zek couldn't help but feel a surge of exhilaration. This was what it meant to work with Vark, to learn from him. It wasn't about fighting harder or being stronger. It was about using everything around you, the environment, the moment, your mind, to create the perfect strategy. For the first time, Zek realized something. This wasn't just an alliance for survival. It was an alliance for growth. They were teaching each other, learning from each other. Zek had always believed that his small size was his weakness, but now he saw that it was his greatest strength. And maybe, just maybe, he was more like Vark than he had ever imagined. As they stood over the fallen creature, Vark turned to Zek, a rare smile on his face. "You did well, little brother," he said, his voice filled with approval. "You're learning." Zek smiled, a genuine smile that he hadn't allowed himself to wear in years. "Thanks, Vark. I think I'm starting to understand." And in that moment, Zek knew this was only the beginning of something much bigger. Together they were unstoppable. The hidden enemy. The jungle grew darker as they ventured deeper into the unknown, the thick trees and vines pressing in around them like a wall of green. Zek had always been cautious, his small size making him an expert at avoiding danger. But there was something different about this journey. The air felt heavier, more oppressive. It was as if the very ground beneath them was alive with anticipation, and Zek couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. Vark, as always, seemed unfazed. His massive form moved with purpose, his eyes sharp and scanning the shadows, constantly aware of his surroundings. But even the apex predator wasn't immune to the tension in the air. He slowed his pace, his eyes narrowing as he studied the dense foliage ahead. "We're not alone," Vark muttered under his breath, his voice calm but filled with a strange intensity. Zek stopped, his instincts kicking in. He could feel it too, a presence lurking just beyond the reach of the moonlight. Something or someone was out there waiting. The thought made Zek's heart race, and his hand instinctively went to the small weapon he had kept hidden, a last line of defense if things went south. But he quickly realized that in this moment weapons wouldn't be enough. The danger was something else entirely. "We need to move," Vark said, his voice low but commanding. "There's a force out here, a presence that isn't natural. It's not just a predator, it's something worse." Zek's mind raced. A predator, sure, he'd encountered plenty of those before. But something worse? That was a concept he couldn't quite grasp. They had already fought creatures that could rip through steel, but nothing had prepared him for what Vark seemed to be sensing. It was as if the entire jungle had become their enemy. The two of them continued their journey, but Zek couldn't shake the feeling that every step they took was leading them deeper into a trap. The trees seemed to close in around them, and the sounds of the jungle grew quieter, more ominous. Even the creatures of the forest seemed to have gone silent, as though they were hiding from whatever danger was approaching. Finally, they reached a clearing, a place where the jungle opened up to reveal a vast ancient structure half swallowed by the earth. Towering stone columns rose from the ground, covered in vines and moss, but there was no mistaking its significance. It was an old ruin, something ancient, far older than anything Zek had ever seen before. And yet, there was something about it that felt wrong, like the very walls were alive with something dark. "This is it," Vark said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The source of the disturbance." Zek felt his stomach tighten. He had always thought of the jungle as a place of survival, a place where creatures fought for dominance, where only the strong survived. But this place was different. It felt like something was waiting for them, something ancient, something with power beyond anything they had encountered. As they stepped into the clearing, a low, rumbling growl echoed through the air, the sound vibrating deep in Zek's chest. His body tensed. The growl wasn't from a creature. They had heard those before. No, this growl came from something much more sinister, something with intelligence, with purpose. And it wasn't alone. Before they could react, the shadows around them seemed to twist and shift. Figures, dark and blurred, emerged from the depths of the jungle. Their eyes gleamed with malice and their forms flickered like phantoms, moving with unnatural speed. They were not like any predator Zek had ever encountered. These creatures were something else entirely. Vark stepped forward, his body poised for battle, but there was a strange look in his eyes, a mixture of recognition and wariness. "They're here," Vark muttered, more to himself than to Zek. "The true predators of this world." Zek's confusion grew. "What are they?" Vark turned to face him, his expression grim. "They are the forgotten ones, creatures who were once rulers of this land, beings who were cast aside and erased from history. They've been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return. The Forgotten Ones? Zek had never heard of such creatures. The name alone sent a chill down his spine. If they were as powerful as Vark suggested, they were a threat unlike anything they had ever faced. The very fact that they had remained hidden for so long only made them more dangerous. Vark raised his arm, signaling Zek to stay back. I've fought them before, but never like this. We need to be smart. They are not just predators. They are hunters. And they won't stop until they have us. Zek's mind raced. This was it. This was the moment where everything changed. His small size, his intelligence, those had always been his advantages. But now it was no longer about surviving against the odds. It was about facing a hidden enemy that had been lying in wait for centuries, ready to reclaim the world that had once been theirs. And the worst part? Zek had no idea how they were going to survive this. The Forgotten Ones circled, their eyes locked onto Zek and Vark, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The jungle had gone eerily quiet once more, as if even the trees knew what was about to happen. Zek's pulse quickened. They were outnumbered, outmatched, and yet there was no turning back now. The battle for their survival had just begun. The ultimate test. The forest had grown impossibly silent, and Zek could feel his heartbeat echoing in his chest, a steady thrum of panic and anticipation. The Forgotten Ones circled them, their shadowy forms like whispers in the night, moving too swiftly for Zek to fully track. Vark stood beside him, his massive frame calm but alert, his eyes narrowing with focus. This was no longer just a survival mission. This was a battle of wits and will, a test that neither of them could afford to fail. Zek had faced predators before, swift, deadly creatures that hunted for sport. But these beings were different. The Forgotten Ones weren't driven by hunger or the need for dominance. They were driven by something older, more dangerous: vengeance. They had been hidden away for centuries, waiting for the perfect moment to return. And now that moment had come. We cannot fight them directly, Vark said quietly, his voice low but steady. They are too numerous, too quick. We need to outsmart them. Zek nodded, his mind racing. Every instinct he had was telling him to run, to escape. But Vark was right. These weren't the kind of enemies that could be outrun. These were hunters, and they didn't make mistakes. This was going to require something more than speed or brute force. It was going to require strategy, precision, and above all, trust. Zek glanced at Vark, who was already moving, his body shifting in the shadows, like a phantom, preparing to take the first step in their deadly game of cat and mouse. It was time to put everything he had learned to the test. I'll create a distraction, Vark said, his voice barely a whisper. You need to use your size and speed to get into the trees. Find a high vantage point. We need to see them all, at once, if we're going to make our move. Zek hesitated for a moment, uncertainty gnawing at him. He had never been in a battle like this, never been forced to trust anyone to such an extent. But he knew Vark was right. They couldn't face these creatures head-on. They needed to use the environment, the very shadows that the Forgotten Ones had come from, to turn the odds in their favor. With a nod, Zek bolted forward, his small body moving quickly, weaving between the trees, using his agility to get above the ground. As he climbed higher into the thick canopy, the night seemed to stretch around him, the world below feeling distant, almost unreachable. The higher he went, the more the jungle revealed itself to him. The patterns in the shadows, the faint flickers of movement, the pulse of the jungle that seemed to align with his own heartbeat. He reached a branch high above the clearing, crouching, low and silent. From this vantage point, he could see the Forgotten Ones clearly for the first time. Their bodies were cloaked in darkness, but their eyes, glowing faintly with an eerie light, betrayed their position. There were 6 of them, moving like a pack, coordinated and relentless. But now, Zek could see their movements, predict their next steps. He was no longer the small, vulnerable creature he once was. The fear that had once controlled him, that had made him doubt himself at every turn, was replaced with something sharper, something focused. He was starting to understand what Vark had meant when he said true strength came from adapting, from thinking not just about survival but about strategy. Zek shifted his weight, his eyes scanning the jungle below for any sign of Vark. He spotted the apex predator moving through the underbrush, setting up the distraction as planned. Vark was drawing the Forgotten Ones in, creating a pattern that Zek could track. It was a risky move, but it was working. The Forgotten Ones were splitting up, following the trail Vark had laid for them. The tension in the air was palpable as Zek waited, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. He could feel the approaching moment, the moment when everything would either fall into place or come crashing down. He had no choice but to trust Vark and hope that he had learned enough to outwit these ancient predators. And then, in the blink of an eye, it happened. Zek leapt from his perch, using the trees as his cover, moving with lightning speed toward the remaining Forgotten Ones. His heart raced, his mind calculating every move, every step. He wasn't just running for his life now. He was fighting for it, fighting to prove that his small size wasn't a weakness, that his intelligence was more powerful than sheer force. As he descended from the trees, he launched himself into the center of the group. The Forgotten Ones were caught off guard, their coordinated movements disrupted by Zek's sudden appearance. It wasn't just a surprise attack. It was a masterstroke of deception, a move that threw off their entire rhythm. They had thought him weak, insignificant, but Zek had learned from the best. Vark's lessons of patience, observation, and cunning were now part of him. The battle raged around them. Zek moved like a shadow, darting in and out of the jungle, using his small size to slip past their grasp. He wasn't trying to overpower them. He was wearing them down, making them make mistakes, forcing them to chase false leads. Vark's roar echoed through the jungle, signaling that he was preparing for the final move. Zek felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. He didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, his instincts guiding him, his mind working in overdrive. With one final calculated strike, Zek and Vark caught the last of the Forgotten Ones in a trap they had set together, using the jungle, using their strengths and their bond as a weapon. It was a victory of strategy, of adaptability, and of trust. Zek had passed the ultimate test, not just of survival, but of becoming something greater than he had ever imagined. And as the last of the Forgotten Ones fell, Zek stood tall, no longer the smallest creature in the room, but a survivor, a strategist, and above all, a warrior. The final revelation. The jungle was quiet now, the battle over, but its echoes still lingered in the air. The bodies of the Forgotten Ones lay scattered across the forest floor, their once ominous presence now reduced to shadows in the moonlight. Zek stood in the center of the clearing, panting from the effort of the fight, his body sore but his mind sharper than it had ever been. His small form felt lighter than ever, no longer burdened by doubt or fear, but strengthened by the triumph of their victory. Vark stood beside him, his massive frame towering over the aftermath of their confrontation, his chest rising and falling with each steady breath. Despite his intimidating presence, Vark seemed almost peaceful, as if the weight of the battle had been lifted from his shoulders. His golden eyes flickered toward Zek, and for the first time, a rare smile crossed his face. "You did it, little brother," Vark said, his voice deep but filled with an unexpected warmth. "You've become more than I imagined." Zek, still catching his breath, glanced up at the giant predator. For all the fear he had once felt toward Vark's sheer size and strength, there was no longer any doubt. They had made it through this, together, facing the impossible, using their strengths and their minds to conquer an ancient enemy. And now, standing here in the silence of the jungle, Zek realized something that had been hidden deep within him all along. You didn't just teach me how to survive," Zek said, his voice quieter now, almost in awe. "You taught me how to live again, to trust again." Vark's smile deepened and he placed a massive hand on Zek's shoulder. "And you've taught me something too," he replied, his voice rumbling with a truth Zek had not expected to hear. "That strength comes not just from power, but from understanding, from connection, from choosing your path, even when the world tries to push you down." Zek's heart skipped a beat. He had always thought of himself as the last of his kind, the final survivor. He had thought of his size as a limitation, something that made him weak in a world that valued strength. But here, in the aftermath of the battle, in the quiet reflection of the jungle, Zek realized the truth. He wasn't just the last of his species. He was something more. He was the future. There was a deep, stirring revelation in the air, something that had been growing ever since he met Vark. The predator who had once looked at him with suspicion and curiosity now stood by his side, as if recognizing the strength within him that had always been there, waiting to be uncovered. Zek turned his gaze to the fallen forgotten ones. The creatures they had just defeated were no longer a threat, but there was something else about them, something that gnawed at him. The forgotten ones had been cast aside, hidden away in the depths of history, and now they were gone. But their legacy, what if it was not just about these ancient predators but about the world itself? "What happens now?" Zek asked, his voice filled with both anticipation and uncertainty. Vark's eyes seemed to soften. "Now, we take what we've learned. We rebuild. We don't have to be the last of anything. There is always more to discover, more to learn. Together we can create something new, something that blends the old with the new. A world where strength doesn't mean dominance but unity." Zek looked up at the stars, the night sky stretching endlessly above him. He felt the weight of everything he had been through, the loss, the pain, the struggle. But it was different, now. The stars above didn't seem so distant anymore. They were within reach, a reminder that even the smallest light could shine in the darkest of places. And in that moment, Zek knew he wasn't alone anymore. He wasn't just a survivor. He wasn't just a remnant of a fallen species. He was part of something bigger, something greater than anything he could have imagined. The past had shaped him, yes, but it was the future he was about to create that would define him. Vark stood next to him, a silent companion in the quiet of the night. The two of them, so different in size and shape, had become something more than allies. They had become brothers, and together they were ready to face whatever came next. For Zek, the journey had just begun, and this time, he was ready.